Hi there, everyone, and welcome to the Daily Gardener, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's November 6th. Today, we celebrate a son of France who developed the first natural classification of flowering plants. We'll also learn about the young female garden writer who teamed up with an Australian botanical illustrator, and together they turned out some fabulous garden classics. And we salute the English poet laureate who wrote inspiringly about gardens. And we grow that garden library today with a tour book of American gardens that was just released this past week. And then we'll wrap things up with the birthday of one of the greatest plant collectors of all time. If you'd like to subscribe to the show, don't forget that you can find it on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeart, and so forth. And then just be sure to subscribe. And to listen to the show while you're at home, don't forget that you can ask Alexa or Google to play the latest episode of the Daily Gardener podcast. And she will. It's just that easy. Here's today's brevities. Today is the anniversary of the death of the French naturalist and botanist Bernard Jussieu, who died on this day, November 6th, 1777. We remember Bernard for developing the first natural classification of flowering plants. And although both Bernard and his brother Antoine were botany professors in Paris, Bernard was the stronger botanist, and there's a famous story about his incredible dedication to botany. One time after botanizing in Lebanon, Bernard was sailing back to France. Of course, drinkable water on board a long voyage home was a precious commodity. Yet Bernard Jussieu purportedly shared his precious water with a little Lebanon cedar seedling that he was bringing home. He wanted to plant the little seedling in the royal garden, and he was determined to bring the little tree back alive to Paris. The French say the seedling lived to be over 200 years old, and it grew to 80 feet high. As for Bernard Jussieu, in 1759, he was summoned to Versailles to develop the Royal Botanic Garden at the Petit Trianon. Unassuming and laid back, Bernard quietly began arranging the plants in the garden in a new way. Jussieu's system of organizing plants into a more natural order was revolutionary at the time, and his method was something that he wouldn't disclose to others. However, Bernard did put together a catalog of the plants in his garden. Bernard recognized a kindred spirit in his nephew, Antoine Laurent. Bernard trained him for 4 years, and when he came of age, Bernard confided his methods of plant classification. As a result, Antoine Laurent's work extended his Uncle Bernard's ideas around grouping plants. It took Antoine Laurent Jussieu almost 20 years of refinement and perfecting his uncle's work before he finally published it as the Bastille was falling in 1789. Antoine Laurent kept Linnaeus's binomial nomenclature in genera plantarum, but he grouped plants by genera and then into families. He called his system natural and strived to let nature be his guide. Today, many plant families can be attributed to Jussieu. Today, there's a metro station near the Paris Botanical Garden named in honor of the Jussieu family, which boasted 5 notable botanists in the family over several generations. And today is the birthday of the botanist and garden writer Ellis Lounsberry, who was born on this day, November 6th, 1868. Alice was a New Yorker, and she developed a love for botany as a young girl. In her mid-20s, she was already serving as a board member for the New York Botanical Garden. But Alice is best known for her botanical books, written with her dear friend and collaborator, the Australian botanical illustrator, Ellis Rowan. So we have Alice and Ellis, and here's the fabulous story of how they met. In the late 1890s, Ellis decided to travel to New York. She caused a bit of a sensation during her first trip to the States a few years earlier. And this trip was no different, except that Ellis contracted influenza after her arrival, and she needed to be hospitalized. Like Alice, New Yorkers read about Ellis's illness, and they sent cards and flowers to her hospital room to cheer her. Now, Alice had an enormous sense of admiration for Ellis, and she felt she needed to do something more personal for her. So Alice decided to hand deliver a box of fresh wildflowers she had hand-picked to the hospital, and she gave them to Ellis's nurse. Ellis was thoroughly charmed by the bouquet and the card, which read, "From one flower seeker to another, and an admirer of your work." The following day, Alice visited Ellis, and even though Alice was 20 years younger than Ellis, the two hit it off. They spent an entire afternoon discussing botany and their work. When Alice offered to show Ellis where she liked to botanize for wildflowers, it was the incentive Ellis needed to get her health back on track. When Alice invited her to illustrate a book on wildflowers she'd been asked to write, their fates as writer and painter were jointly sealed. Together, they produced 3 books. A guide to the wildflowers in 1899. It described around 500 wildflowers. A Guide to the Trees came out in 1900, and it described nearly 200 trees and shrubs. And then Southern Wildflowers and Trees came out in 1901, and Alice wrote this in the preface. To learn something of the history, the folklore, and the uses of Southern plants, and to see rare ones growing in their natural surroundings, Mrs. Rowan and I traveled in many parts of the South, always exercising our best blandishments to get the people of the section to talk with us. Through the mountainous region, we drove from cabin to cabin, and nowhere could we have met with greater kindness and hospitality. While they were working on their book on Southern wildflowers, Alice and Ellis's time together was marred by tragedy. They were surrounded by the beauty of the Blue Ridge Mountains when a telegram came for Ellis. Her only son, Eric, had died in South Africa. He was just 22 years old. After finishing these books, the two went their separate ways. Alice continued to write after working with Ellis, but without Ellis's artwork, her books failed to attract the same level of popularity. In 1910, Alice wrote a book called Gardens Near the Sea. In this book, Alice shared her thoughts on the garden. For the garden is not only a place in which to make things grow and to display the beautiful flowers of the earth, but a place that should accord with the various moods of its admirers. It should be a place in which to hold light banter, a place in which to laugh, and besides, should have a hidden corner in which to weep. But above all, perhaps, it should be a place of sweet scent and sentiment. After suffering a stroke, Alice Lounsberry died at the age of 81 on November 20th, 1949. In Unearthed Words, here are some words about gardening from Alfred Austin, the British poet laureate, from his 1894 work, The Garden That I Love. A garden that you make yourself becomes associated with your personal history and that of your friends, interwoven with your tastes, preferences, and character, and constitutes a sort of unwritten but withal manifest autobiography. Show me your garden, provided it be your own, and I will tell you what you are like. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, American Gardens by Monty Don and Derry Moore. This book came out just last week, and the subtitle is 100 Contemporary Designs. In this book, the beloved British horticulturist Monty Don and world-class photographer Derry Moore take us on a diverse and mesmerizing tour of American gardens. Monty and Derry take us on a garden adventure from Jefferson's Monticello to Longwood Gardens in Delaware to Middleton Place in South Carolina to Central Park in New York, Bob Hope's Palm Springs Garden, Frank Lloyd Wright's garden, and the Seattle Spheres, as well as many, many more. This book will leave you with a richer understanding of some of America's top gardens with beautiful photography and fascinating garden stories. This book is 224 pages of gorgeous American gardens, and I think it would make a wonderful gift for the holidays. You can get a copy of American Gardens by Monty Don and Derry Moore and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $38. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. Today is the birthday of the British plant collector and explorer Frank Kingdon Ward, who was born on this day, November 6th, 1885. During the beginning of the 20th century, Frank Kingdon Ward went on 24 Indiana Jones-like expeditions throughout Tibet, China, and Southeast Asia to search for rare and elusive species of plants. Among his many accomplishments, Frank found the legendary Tibetan blue poppy. Frank's accounts of his adventures are captivating. In 1942, he arrived in New Delhi after a 500-mile walk over mountains and through jungles. The newspaper account said, "A thin, wiry little man in his 50s, Captain Kingdon Ward, decided that the Japanese were getting too close for comfort, so he loaded 2 60-pound bags of rice on 2 mules. But instead of taking the short road through the Chalkin Pass, he decided to travel the 500-mile mule trail through Tibet. Frank tramped knee-deep in the snow and crossed the Himalayas at the 14,500-foot pass. Frank said, 'It was a pleasant walk, and my reward is in the finding of dazzling flowers never seen before. You know, these flowers may always blush unseen unless you manage to take them back home and make them grow where others can admire them. They are a little bit of the enchantment of Asia transplanted into England or America. It is satisfying enough if you can feel in an industrial age like the present that you have brought home a little beauty for others to enjoy.'" Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced in lovely Wyoming, Minnesota with the help of Paige Mance, Brooke Bierbaum, Kiana Rayleigh, Maddie Doyle, Natalie Decker, and Eric Begay. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media. You can follow the show on Instagram, and listeners always have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for the show. Just search for Daily Gardener Community the next time you're on Facebook and request to join. All the stories and books that are featured on the show can be found over at thedailygardener.org, thedailygardener.org. And while you're there, be sure to sign up for my free Friday newsletter. Last but not least, you can share your own gardener greetings on the show by emailing me at jennifer@thedailygardener.org. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and as always, have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.